Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is The Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is Canada's most irreverent talk show, The Andrew Lawton Show on True North on this Monday, December 11th. And yes, I am back. Did you miss me? I missed you, although I did enjoy the week off. Rest assured, I was not kicking back with my feet up in a margarita on a beach anywhere. I was, in fact, hard at work. I can't recall if I mentioned it earlier on the program, but I'm working on a book right now, and it's about twice as long as my previous book and a lot more work. So I decided I needed to just take a week of vacation time just to aggressively get ahead so I can finish this thing and keep my publisher happy. And I haven't finished it just yet. I still have some more on that. So if you've emailed me, I've been very negligent in correspondence, and I apologize for that. But hopefully we'll be able to get it done, and I'll be able to share lots about this project with you in due course. Hopefully, due course is not time limited, but due course in this case, I hope is not too far off. And while I was taking a week in quiet contemplation and working on this book, I did something tremendously suave and cool. I fell down the stairs in my own home. I didn't do the Trudeaupian tumble for a laugh. He used to do that as a party trick, Justin Trudeau. I was walking downstairs. My office is deep into the basement, 7 levels below the surface of the earth. Not actually. And I don't even know what happened. I was wearing really slippery socks, and the floor was really clean. And then I just took a foot that just went forward and went sliding down and landed in some horrendously unpleasant way. And I've been gradually getting back to the point where I can walk without limping. And this was a week ago. So this is my karmic retribution for taking time off the show. If I just stayed down in this little studio, this never would have happened. So nevertheless, I am very much fine. Had to ice the crap out of my knee, but we're getting back into full strength broadcasting right now. And boy, we have a lot to talk about. One of the big developments of the last week that I missed was that Melanie Joly, who is ostensibly Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, has finally decided that rape is wrong. This is the woman who is the great purveyor of Canada's so-called feminist foreign policy. And after 2 months, she's finally realized that, maybe it was bad that Hamas raped all of those Jewish girls and women in Israel back in October when they launched their massive attack. We'll talk about that with Brian Lilley and the perils of virtue signaling as a matter of public policy. What else do we have going on the show today? We've got a lot to get to. Kris Sims is also going to be here. We'll talk about how the carbon tax is going to cost you even more because the government is spending $200 million just to administer the carbon, not even to save the planet, to save the baby seals, to pluck the straws out of the turtles' noses. No, they're just spending $200 million to manage the carbon tax, which is supposedly going to save the planet. So we'll talk about all that later on. But I first want to talk about this petition. Now, I hate being a bit of a killjoy. A couple of weeks ago, when this petition was making its way around, what's the number of the petition? I should pull it up here. It's petition E4701. A petition that was initiated by a woman in Peterborough, was sponsored by Conservative Member of Parliament Michelle Ferreri, a petition that says Canadians have lost confidence in Justin Trudeau and call on the House to have a vote of no confidence. Now, I was a bit of a killjoy a couple of weeks ago when this was first going. I said, yeah, if the petition makes you happy and it makes you feel good, sign it, but it's not going to do anything. And last week, True North had a little bit of a Zoom thing. Oh, not a little bit. It was a Zoom thing. I don't know why I said it was a little bit, but we had this Zoom thing for some of our insiders, people that are a member of our monthly donor program. And someone asked about this. And I gave my same killjoy wet blanket answer. And then Candace Malcolm said I was the in-house political scientist, which was her nice way of saying I was the killjoy because I just went all technical and know-it-all. But I wanted to bring it up again because I'm still getting so many questions and so many emails and tweets about this petition. People saying, why are you not talking about this more? Why are you not promoting it more? And here's the reason. For starters, I don't really promote petitions because in general, I don't think they're newsworthy. The exception is when a petition does particularly well, it is newsworthy. This one is doing particularly well. It is a House of Commons petition. Can you tell me the last time there was a House of Commons petition? No, you probably can't unless you're a freak, because no one pays attention to these things because they usually get like 4 signatures. And this one has, at this point, let me refresh because it keeps going up. It's literally gone up 1,000 since when I refreshed it shortly before the show. 248,244 signatures. I suspect by the end of the show, and Sean, don't let me get off the air without doing this, it will be at 250,000 by the end of the show. Now, 250,000, it's a milestone. It's a big number. Does it matter? No. And this is where I get to be a bit of a killjoy. Now, I can celebrate the momentum of it, and I can say this shows there's a lot of animus towards Justin Trudeau. But the point that I raised when I brought this up a couple of weeks ago is that if you look at the 2021 election results, Justin Trudeau got 5.5 million votes. The Conservatives got 5.7, the Bloc got 1.3, the NDP 3 million, the Greens 400,000, Maxime Bernier 840,000. You combine all of that together and you've got like 11, 12 million votes that were cast for people other than the Liberals. So in that context, finding 250,000 people that say they're not happy with Trudeau is not all that impressive. Now, the catch there is finding 250,000 that are willing to go out of their way to sign a parliamentary petition. Because if you juxtapose this petition and what seems to be a growing fatigue and animosity towards Justin Trudeau with the Liberal poll numbers right now, you see that there is a very real shift happening. The government that won a majority government less than a decade ago and was reelected twice in 2019 and 2021 is right now looking like it's going to be headed towards, if the election were held today, a catastrophic failure that is even more embarrassing than the Liberal government's vote or the Liberal Party's vote share in 2011. 2011 was when Stephen Harper won a majority government. The Liberals with Michael Ignatieff were absolutely decimated. And the Liberals they basically could have their caucus meetings in a booth at Applebee's because there were so few of them. So this is where we look at time and time again, the Liberal brand being in just free fall. And the Liberals are going to use the same attacks on Pierre Poilievre that they used on Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole. We're already seeing it. He's far right. He's Trumpian. That was Mark Gerritson's go-to. Pierre Poilievre's being like Trump. Why? How? Well, he's just like Trump. You're just supposed to not like him. He's like Trump. Anyone they don't like is at Trump. The server that gives you a bit of a side-eye glance at the store, at the restaurant, she's like Trump. Pierre Poilievre's like Trump. Doug Ford's like Trump. All of that. They don't really do. It's Mad Libs. They just keep the same words, and it's the worst type of Mad Libs as a result. So what's happening here is the Liberal government is presiding over the profound collapse of the Liberal coalition and of the Liberal support. Now, Conservatives have snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in the past. So no one should just shrug if you want Justin Trudeau gone and say, well, the work is done, the job is done. It's still not entirely clear when the next election will be. Just this morning, the Liberals unveiled this weird dental plan for seniors and children that was meant to pacify the NDP. But if you look at it, like it's not even what they initially promised. What the NDP wanted was some massive universal socialized dental plan. And instead, the Liberals have given them this program that doesn't even really apply to such a huge number of people. And what's fascinating here is that right now the NDP I believe, have everything to gain by having an election right now. Like the NDP as a party have everything to gain. If they had an election right this second, Justin Trudeau would be decimated. Most of that would be to the benefit of the Conservatives, but the NDP would increase their vote share, and Jagmeet Singh might even be the leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. He might get to live in Stornoway, which is about, NDP loves subsidized housing. They love government housing. Jagmeet Singh in Stornoway would be very, very poetic. But for Jagmeet Singh personally, it's all downside. It's all downside. Sean is asking if I want to make a Jack Layton joke. Well, it's a massage parlor. It's not a massage parlor. It's Stornoway. I don't have a good Jack Layton joke on this one. But the thing that I will point out about the the NDP and the Jagmeet Singh situation is that Jagmeet Singh has everything to lose. The NDP as a party will gain, he will lose because he has got to be gone. His party has to get rid of him for just being such a profound and dismal failure after the next election. And then they're going to bring in someone else who may or may not be more radical than Singh is. So that's the NDP advantage, as you've heard me say in the past, to keeping the Liberals going until 2025. But for Justin Trudeau, he's gone after the next election. Singh is gone after the next election. Pierre Poilievre is likely at this point going to be prime minister after the next election. So no one really wants to pull the trigger now, except for the Conservatives who can't do it. So this is where we go back to this petition. I understand the anger. I understand people saying, I want to vote a non-confidence now. But you could have the vote now, and the NDP is still going to vote the way they voted on every single confidence motion, the way they're voting in the budget, the way they voted on the throne speech. So even if the petitioners were to get what they wanted, it's not going to amount to a hill of difference. So the message in all of this is not to not sign the petition. If you want to sign the petition, if it's meaningful to you, if it's valuable to you, if it feels good to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and say, I want Justin Trudeau gone, absolutely, but don't do it in a manner in which you think that something more is going to come from that than what is. And Michelle Ferreri, I just saw on Twitter this morning, is that she's getting, like, everyone's very threatened by this petition for weird reasons. So they're trying to just dismiss it and downplay it and say the points that I've been making, but to do it in a more negative way. And Michelle Ferreri is like, yeah, of course. I mean, anyone can sign a petition. That's the point of it, is that these things, but they are vetted. You do have to be a real person. One of my colleagues just wants to start a poll. Is Andrew Lawton a killjoy? Yes, Andrew Lawton is a killjoy, but I'm trying to make everyone smarter by being a killjoy, because then we'll all be in the trenches together. So take from that what you will. But yes, this is not Canada's most irreverent talk show. It's Canada's most joyless talk show. We've just replaced irreverence with joylessness for this holiday season. I am a regular old Grinch here, and you know what? I will try to put on the green face makeup, which is, again, more palatable this time of year than Justin Trudeau's makeup of choice. So nevertheless, we will move on there and talk about this. Really, I don't even want to use this to make fun of the Liberal government. Make no mistake, I will. But this is far more serious than just the obvious headline that is at stake here, which is that the Foreign Affairs Minister, the chief convener of Canadian foreign policy, Melanie Joly, has finally, after 2 months, acknowledged the sexual violence, the rapes that took place against Israeli and Jewish women and girls at the hands of Hamas. Now, this took 2 months. Now, you may think that's bad enough as it is. And if you look at the widespread anti-Semitism that is unfolding across the country, across the West, you may not be all that surprised by it. The Liberal government in some ways has been very unequivocally in support of Israel, but in other ways they've equivocated. And certainly the longer Israel's counteroffensive to Hamas has gone on, the weaker Canadian government officials have been in their response. But we go back to what Justin Trudeau has articulated as the essence of Canada's foreign policy, which is that it's not a foreign policy rooted in Canada first. It is a feminist foreign policy. And when else do you need a feminist foreign policy but when sexual violence is taking place in a foreign conflict? And this is oddly where our foreign affairs minister was nowhere to be found for 2 months. Brian Lilley had a great piece about this in the Toronto Sun. Joly proves Trudeau's feminist foreign policy just empty words. He joins me now. Brian, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
I mean, I don't know if you were in this boat. I sort of mocked this idea of a feminist foreign policy when it was first announced, because it just didn't seem to be coming from anywhere and rooted in any practical manifestations of what this would be. But the government was committed to it. They said, we're going to apply a gender lens to everything, and they do this in their dealings in government. And here we have one case where you'd think the feminist perspective is pretty ironclad and pretty clear-cut, and oddly, our foreign policy was not interested in that.
No, they weren't. But look, this goes back to every issue that Trudeau's dealt with on this front. You recall that when he was first elected, he said he'd have a gender-balanced cabinet. And I'm going off memory here, so if I'm off by one or two, please forgive me. But 2015, he announces the gender balanced cabinet. And why? Because it's 2015. And then we get the order of precedence, which details which cabinet ministers are considered most senior, which ones would take over in the event something happens to the prime minister. And it's all old white men at the top. And then we find out that 5 of the 15 cabinet ministers in that first cabinet are all junior cabinet ministers. They're not even full ministers. So they make less money, they have less seniority, they have fewer, a lesser department, and they were all women. So, that was pointed out and they said, oh, well, that's just a mistake. And then they fixed it. Time and again, you can look at their feminist credentials, and Trudeau fails on every front, groping a reporter, elbowing, a female MP in the breast just because things were being delayed and he was frustrated. Time and again, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott, Selena
Caesar Chavez, CCC.
Yes. Just look at the way that women who have dealt with him describe how he talks to them. So it's no surprise that when it comes to a feminist foreign policy, it's just about words as well, empty words. This government is about the announcement. It's not about governing. It's not about the policy. It's just about putting out a press release.
Yeah, and I mean, this is not to broaden the discussion unnecessarily here, but we've seen a tectonic shift in the last 5 years, the last 6 years, in how we view sexual violence and how we view sexual assault. And whatever people think of the Me Too movement, the refrain that came out of this era was "believe all women." And now the number of people I see on social media, people that are very supportive of the government being slow to respond on this, saying, well, I don't know, did the rapes actually happen? And I don't know if we believe, but they don't even care about this glaring gap in the rules they've established over the last 6 years and the rules as they pertain to Hamas terrorists.
Melanie Joly was Heritage Minister when the Me Too movement started, and she went on CBC on Q and did an interview all about that topic. She was Foreign Minister last year when the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, and as part of her feminist foreign policy, stood there with Justin Trudeau denouncing the American Supreme Court overturning abortion law, federal abortion precedent, and returning that issue to state legislatures. She always had things to say on that. But on this issue, where there was proof of Israeli women, Jewish women, being raped as a weapon of war, she was silent. She just couldn't be bothered talking about it. But then compare, as I did in the column in The Sun, October 17th, and there is the claim by Hamas, a terrorist organization, puts out a claim that Israel has bombed the Al-Shifa hospital. Melanie Joly doesn't wait for proof. She tweets that doing this is a war crime. That tweet is still up. She believed Hamas with no proof. The international observers, the Israeli government, the Israeli Defense Forces, images put up by Hamas themselves to brag about what they did, all point to the proof that women were raped on October 7th, that this was a tactic they used. The instruction manuals found on dead Hamas fighters detailed that, yes, this is part of what you should do. And she couldn't bother denouncing it. Now, I'll give the Trudeau government some credit. From early on, they said the right thing about the October 7th attacks. Justin Trudeau denounced it, said that Israel has a right to defend itself. He was steadfast in that. But as you alluded to, as the conflict's gone on, they've started to waver all over the place. But for the Foreign Affairs Minister of a feminist government implementing a feminist foreign policy, not to come up with this, it is mind-boggling. I was writing on another issue today, and I'm finding references to their feminist agenda on climate change. I don't think a lot of mothers who do shopping for their kids to feed them will be happy with what that leads to, with a higher price for hamburger meat. But this language is peppered all through the government's talking points and its agenda. It's just not present in the actual reality of how they operate.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's ever looked at ATIPs, government documents, you'll see oftentimes these reports on the gender-based GBA plus, gender-based analysis plus, and it's that you have to take anything and everything and somehow find a gender argument. You want to talk about office chairs? Well, let's do a gender-based analysis to make sure that gender needs are being met, and all of this stuff. And you're right that it's a government that on paper claims it's doing this in every single facet of its existence. And they're certainly bringing in diversity trainers to that end. But when the rubber hits the road, it's nowhere to be found.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons this government is so frustrating is that the policy is the communications tool. The policy isn't governing. The policy isn't saying, you know what, we're going to go to the UN and we're going to raise issue with the fact that Iran is chairing I forget what the exact title is, but there's a gender council within the human rights realm at the United Nations, and Iran's chairing that? How is that feasible, and why are we not complaining loudly? I don't doubt that Bob Rae is. I disagree with Bob Rae on an awful lot of policy, but he is a fundamentally decent man, especially on issues like this. But he speaks for the government, but he doesn't set the policy. But we should be banging our shoes on the table like the old Soviets at the UN, demanding that something be done when you get Iran, who is oppressing women, beating them for not wearing their hijabs in public, and they're in charge of a committee on gender rights?
You can't make it up. That's the terrible part of this.
Okay, can I tell you something quick about these crazy bits? Because back during the Harper government, there was something similar. North Korea, as they're trying to build their bomb, is named the head of the Nuclear Disarmament Committee or something to that effect. And I looked at John Wright, who was then the Foreign Affairs Minister, and I said, how does this happen? He said, believe it or not, they go on an alphabetical order, and they were next. And it's often how these things happen.
So then, like, Oman was next, and then Pakistan would have also been, coming up there. That's an alphabetical order. Okay, so when you're launching your new dictatorship, you want to call it like Ardvarkistan or something, and then you'll be like first on the order of precedence for all of these things.
For Peace and Democracy Council.
Yeah, exactly. Let me just, I want to talk about one of your climate pieces, but before, let me just ask you about the equivocation and the wavering of this government. Do you think it is a government that is letting its, inner desires come out, like they were only able to hold up the veneer for so long? Or do you think they're responsive to a change in the climate that they're seeing, and it's a bit more cynical in that sense?
I think that there are real divides within the Liberal Party, and I think there's real divides on the issue of how to, what stand to take on the war that Hamas launched against Israel within Canadian society at large. I've taken what I believe to be the only correct moral stand, and that is that Israel has a right to defend itself, and the true oppressors of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, well, that's Hamas, and Hamas must be eradicated. I'm glad to see Bernie Sanders in the United States saying that. While we've got progressive politicians up here calling for ceasefire, Bernie Sanders is on TV explaining why that can't happen. We need more of that. But so I think Trudeau was trying to please all people, and in the end, he's pleased none. The Jewish community is livid with Justin Trudeau, and for the most part, the Jewish community have been reliable Liberal voters. Some did move over to the Conservatives during the Harper years, but for the most part, most have still been reliably Liberal. And but the Muslim community, which has been courted by Trudeau, well, you saw the story the other day, 400 Muslim professionals who have been donors to the Laurier Club signed a letter saying they're leaving. And then on the weekend, there was a pro-Palestinian demonstration in Ottawa that marched to Langevin Block, where Trudeau's office is, and were denouncing him as a terrorist, claiming that he had blood on his hands for refusing to call for a ceasefire now. And so he's lost both sides. By trying to make everybody happy, he's made nobody happy. And I think it's going to have lead to a real shift in Canadian politics. Exactly how, I think we're still seeing that, shake out.
Yeah, very well said. Just before I let you go, Brian, I have to ask about this piece you had this morning in the Toronto Sun. Trudeau targets cow burps and your ability to afford beef. What is going on?
Okay, let me just switch my browser window here to this is the Government of Canada announces new economic incentive to reduce methane emissions from beef cattle. It is the protocol called Reducing Enteric Methane Emissions from Beef Cattle. Cows burp a lot, and they want that to change. They don't want as many cow burps. They want better handling of manure on farms. Look, these are all good things, and farmers are some of the most environmentally conscious, actually environmentally conscious people you will ever meet, because it's their livelihood. But what the Trudeau government wants to do is try and get farmers to use more expensive feeds. Right now, most cattle in this country, they are raised on from calf to stock, they're raised on a diet of grass or hay, and they might be finished with corn at the end, but they're going to be raised on mostly on that. They're going to be out in the pasture in the winter. They're going to eat from those big round bales of hay that we see going by on trucks all the time. Going to a corn-based diet, corn silage, or adding red seaweed apparently can help reduce the methane, or adding chemicals. This has potential to change the composition of the beef, but also it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be more expensive. Now they say, well, we're going to be able to allow farmers to sell offsets and that'll make them more money. Well, just like the carbon tax, though, it's going to drive up prices. And so you and I are going to have to pay more. We're all going to be like Cousin Eddie from National Lampoon saying, I don't know why they call it hamburger helper. Tastes just fine on its own, because we won't be able to afford the hamburger. Now, here's the other funny part is for years, you've had consumers who can afford it moving towards grass-fed beef. And you see grass-fed milk. Why? It's supposed to be healthier, less saturated fats, more omega-3 fatty acids, more nutrients. Well, guess what? You're going to have less of that if you follow the government's plan, because the beef will be better for the planet, but not as good for you. So it's a bizarre situation, but climate change policy comes before everything, including you having a healthy diet, Andrew.
Yeah, so coming soon is going to be like the bovine flatulence tax, where, cows just basically have to pay a levy anytime they, let a bit of gas out. $1 out the front, $2 out the back. I think that's how it's going to be calculated.
Jacinda Ardern's government, New Zealand, brought in one of those. Now, they've just lost power, and they've brought in a conservative government who's put that on pause for now. They'll probably scrap it. But yeah, they brought in a cow burp tax and a sheep burp tax. So, don't give them ideas. These things are out there, and we don't want to encourage them.
All right, fair enough. Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun, always a pleasure. We should do this again sooner rather than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Now, the one thing, here's a segue I can give you. Sometimes you don't get the natural segue. If the government does do the bovine flatulence tax, they are going to spend as much to administer it as the tax will collect. This is a report from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, $200 million to administer the carbon tax. That is not money that's going towards the stated aims of the carbon tax. That is just money gone to manage the bureaucracy. Kris Sims is the Alberta director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and does not yet join us. I jumped the gun there. We'll have Kris Sims in just a moment. I got excited. I saw Kris in like the chat, the behind the scenes waiting room, green room chat, and I thought she was ready, but we'll have her on in just a moment. But $200 million. Now, this is just in the last 3 years alone. Last year, it was $82.6 million. So we're paying this as Canadians just for the government to manage having a carbon tax. Now we have Kris Sims here. We, good things come to those who wait, and no gooder thing to make up a word than Kris Sims on the show. Kris, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today. Oh, maybe we're still waiting. Do we still have Kris? Oh, Kris is gone again. Oh, I was tempting fate. See what happens? I get excited, I jump the gun, and then the whole thing goes to hell in a handbasket. Maybe Kris is just like checking the cattle out in the area in Alberta to make sure they're all ready to pay their bovine flatulence tax. But the other thing I'll say, and I'll bring it up now while we wait here, nearly half of Canadians think that a carbon tax is ineffective in fighting climate change. Nearly half of Canadians. Now, the government wants you to believe that a carbon tax is just this thing that everyone likes, that's uncontroversial. The only people that don't like the carbon tax are those like evil anti-science troglodytes in the Conservative Party. Canadians want it. Canadians are happy to pay for it. Well, clearly this is not the case. When the government gave a carbon tax exemption to the good people of Atlantic Canada who need home heating oil, everyone else in the country was saying, well, we want an exemption too. Just this week, I believe it was yesterday or 2 days ago, the Premier of the Northwest Territories came out and said, well, we want an exemption. I don't know if you've ever been to the Northwest Territories. I have not myself, but it gets a little cold up there. So obviously they have to deal with aggressive energy consumption. And you can understand why they are saying now that they want a bit of a break when everyone else is getting a bit of a break. The Conservatives did a massive filibuster. And the point of this, excuse me for a moment, excuse me, the point of this filibuster was to basically try to handcuff the government into having this carbon tax be the hill it was going to die on. Now, the government didn't roll, the government didn't fold, and Conservatives were, voting all through the night. There was a video that Pierre Poilievre posted of bringing some order of McDonald's in. Now that was very Trump-like. Trump would have done the McDonald's order, but of being very Trump-like in bringing fast food. I believe we have Kris Sims again now. Let's give this one more try here. Kris, hello.
I won't make any sudden movements. That was super freaky. I loved that hit you did with Brian, because we did that exact story on Sun News Network, that eventually through the United Nations or WEF or whoever other global group wants to tax the bejesus out of us, will eventually start taxing the emissions from cows. And we were all called crazy conspiracy theorists at the time. So nice to see that. Well, I guess it's not nice to see that's actually coming to fruition from the sounds of it.
So when we look at this $200 million to administer, where is that going?
It's going to bureaucrats. So that is going to people who work either in their offices or in their pajamas on laptops in the Ottawa-Gatineau region. So people who've lived in Ottawa usually call it the National Capital Region. Most of
the
them
bubble,
are
the Ottawa bubble.
Exactly, the Ottawa bubble. It goes from, Kent Street to Elgin Street, thereabouts. And this is what's key here, is that not only is the carbon tax an unfair punishment on Canadians for daring to eat food and daring to stay warm during winter, it's an administrative burden as well, because they hire new bureaucrats to do this. And $200 million, that can kind of go over people's heads because it's an awful lot of money. If you do the math over that 3-year window, we could have instead paid 300 brand new police officers for the entire 3 years, or 300 paramedics. With what's going on, especially in our inner cities, Andrew, that might have been a better use of our money.
I mean, whenever we talk about, either you or I or just me on the show about debt servicing and debt maintenance charges, the one thing that comes up is that every dollar that's going towards that is a dollar that's being wasted. It's just, Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland just taking the money, lighting it on fire because you get absolutely nothing for it. And that's effectively what's happening here. I mean, we make a couple of bureaucrats and their families happy, I guess, by giving them salaries that are unnecessary, but there is no value produced. There is nothing created or generated, no service provided for this. And I mean, the thing that they're administering is something that in and of itself is harmful. So even if the carbon tax had an administration cost of $0, it would still be economically harmful. But now we're paying $200 million really for the privilege of decimating our economy.
Yes, and this is exactly why Grover Norquist, who's been a lead tax fighter in the United States and worked under the Reagan administration, famously said, government should be small enough to drown in the bathtub. And this is why. Because if you opt for bigger government and bigger taxes, you're going to get ever larger government, because they will always increase the size and scope of government along with increasing their taxation of you. This is not something that they're going to economize on. This is not something that they're just going to automatically add on to whatever workload is currently being enacted by the bureaucrats. It always is going to cost you more. And I can hear people right now, some folks saying, well, what about the rebates? No. Listen, the Parliamentary Budget Officer already did the math on this. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's mandatory federal carbon tax already costs the average Canadian family up to $700 extra just this year with the rebates factored in. Now we've done this digging at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and found that on top of that, it's costing us $200 million over the last 3 years just to push the papers around.
Just on this, I mentioned briefly that poll that was done. Nearly half of Canadians, so 46%, think carbon taxes are ineffective at fighting climate change. There's nowhere near the consensus that the Liberal government claims there is on this issue. I mean, really, if you were to take the number of people that voted Liberal and the number of people that voted NDP, I mean, maybe there's your 46%, but I'd say it's actually of that a subset, especially in northern and rural and Atlantic Canada, that are more skeptical of this. So the point of this is that the consensus that every Canadian is okay with this is just a lie.
It is. It's a huge lie. And I think that it's now becoming real, where people are shifting and realizing, hey, wait, this isn't saving the planet. I think it's becoming real for 3 different reasons. One, people just can't afford it. They just flat out can't afford it. In the same way, in a more extreme example, we'll often hear people and analysts say things like, you know what, if you are in a developing country and you can barely afford food or clean water for your child, you're not so worried about the environment, right? You're not so worried about green initiatives. It's only when you reach a certain level of affluence that you can actually pick your head up and go, whoa, okay, maybe I want to, save this forest or prevent this species from going extinct. Those are good things. I think in a more micro version of this, we're seeing a little bit of that right now in Canada, because we're seeing record demand for food banks from working people, meaning people who are holding down a job, pulling in a wage, are still having to rely on charity for jars of peanut butter and applesauce to feed their kids. That's grim. We also have folks who are fighting to even afford rent and mortgages here, the very basics of keeping a shelter and a roof over your head. So when rubber hits the road, so to speak, they don't care as much about this sort of stuff. Also, we've got math and data to back this up now, because Prime Minister Trudeau fashioned his carbon taxes, both of them, we've got 2 now, after British Columbia's. What's been happening in British Columbia? Since 2008, British Columbia has had a carbon tax. They now have 2, and they're super expensive. What's also been happening? Their emissions keep going up anyway. And this is government data. This is the government of British Columbia's data showing that as the carbon tax goes up, the emissions almost always keep on going up anyway, because people still need to eat and they still need to heat their homes. And I think that story, Andrew, is getting out. It's seeping out past the Rockies, and people are realizing that they're getting screwed.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say, if you accept the premise that emissions are inherently bad and causing climate change and all of that, which I think is dubious at best. But even if you do, and you look at what the government's stated objective is, which is reducing emissions, you're absolutely right. And I think the government has tried to position this issue as one in which emitting is a luxury that people choose to do the things that cause all these emissions. They choose to have products that need to be shipped. They choose to get on a plane to go and see grandma. They choose to drive a vehicle that is not a hybrid, when the reality is these things are products of demand. And it's not to say you couldn't make a choice that perhaps has a marginal benefit over another choice, but Canadians are not doing that because they want to. It's not like they're getting into the Hummer and just like idling it in the parking lot for the good of their health. They're doing it because, well, they're not doing that, but they're doing the things that are driving those emissions up because they are necessary. And when you look at it through that lens, it's insane that we are dealing with all of this while the world is still producing and while other countries are still producing, while China is investing in building coal plants.
Yes, exactly. I try to appeal to the folks who truly are scared about emissions. Truly, earnestly, okay? I grew up partly on Vancouver Island, okay? I swam with the orcas. I hand-sewed my baby's cloth diapers. I even rode a bike in the Glebe in Ottawa for 13 years. I get it, okay? Let's say that emissions are what keeps you up at night. Mathematically speaking, global emissions. Even if Canada, God forbid, ceased to exist tomorrow, okay? We all stopped driving. We all stopped eating. We all stopped heating our homes, stopped existing. It wouldn't make a dent in global emissions because we are a teeny tiny little, like, it's even off the screen, Andrew, when we talk about global emissions. So that being understood, if that's what you really want to tackle, does it not make sense to tackle the big end of that arithmetic problem? Let's leave China off the table for a second because they're a communist country and it's more difficult to deal with them. Talk about India, okay? We have a lot more in common with them. They're a democracy, right? They actually want to buy our natural gas. India has, on average, between 250 and 300 million people, so 10 times our size, thereabouts, burning wood and animal refuse every day for heating and eating. Folks, imagine that. Imagine the entire population of Canada, about 10 times the size roughly, burning that stuff indoors every day. Their emissions are off the charts for that. Not to speak of their indoor air pollution and the burden on women and children for collecting that fuel. But guess what? They want to buy our natural gas, which is way cleaner burning, okay? They still need to heat and they still need to eat, just like the rest of us, okay? They're human beings and they deserve to do that. They want to use our cleaner fuel. So why don't we then use our brains, instead of taxing people for driving a minivan, why don't we use our brains and ship them our natural gas, using our best environmental regulations in the whole world and really high labor standards for extracting said fuel? Like, that kind of sounds like a win-win mathematically, and we don't tax people and punish them needlessly for doing the basics here in Canada.
Kris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, thank you as always. We will talk to you next Monday.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, we are doing something a little bit special on the Andrew Lawton Show this holiday season. We always do some year in review type shows because you don't necessarily have the ability to bank on there being breaking news content you can cover and, December 27th or anything like that. But I thought we'd do something fun, and I'm kind of stealing this from Ezra Levant, who does some variation of this every year. But every now and then, you all email me questions, and I try to answer them. But let's carve out a bit of time on the show where I'm going to answer your questions, no matter how wacky or invasive or intrusive they are, because I can just take out the ones that I don't like ahead of time. But if you want to send your questions in, we'll do a special episode in the coming weeks in which I delve into some of these. It could be anything. It could be what I think about a particular political issue. It could be what I think about a particular person. You could fish for some story from my past, or you could ask a technical question about how this show works, such as, for example, Andrew, do you wear pants when you're on air? And the answer is it depends, but I'm not tilting the camera down today. So all of that is to say, send me your questions, andrew@truenorthcanada.com. My email is andrew@truenorthcanada.com, and I won't reply to your email because I'm going to save it and do a big mailbag episode as we wind down the show for the year. So send your questions to Andrew Lawton. That's me, by the way, if you didn't know, andrew@truenorthcanada.com. That does it for us for today. We will be back with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show in just 23 hours and 15 minutes here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.